There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. A certain kind of silence that comes after years of noise. The silence of a phone you stop checking, not because you're busy, but because you finally stopped hoping. Birthdays pass without a single text, and something in you doesn't break. Something in you exhales. From the outside, they'll call you cold. They'll say you changed. They'll whisper that you cut everyone off like it's a character flaw, like you woke up one day and decided to become the villain in their story. But what if the truth is darker and cleaner than that? What if you were already alone long before you left? What if your nervous system simply stopped investing in connections that kept charging you a price you could no longer afford? Jung would say the psyche doesn't become ruthless for no reason. It becomes precise when it has been forced to survive. And sometimes the act that looks like abandonment from the outside is actually individuation from the inside, the moment you stop confusing loyalty with self-erasure. Stay with me, because the real reason you cut people off is not what you think, and once you see it, you'll never unsee your patterns again. Let's name the role they gave you, because naming is the beginning of freedom. They call you the cold one, the one who went quiet, the one who stopped showing up, the one who vanished without the courtesy of an explanation. And maybe you believe that label for a while because shame is persuasive when it's repeated often enough. But here's what Jung understood about labels. Families, friendships, and social circles don't only exchange affection, they exchange projections, they assign characters, they cast you into a part that serves their unconscious needs, and when you refuse the role, they rewrite the plot so you appear guilty for refusing to keep performing. You weren't born cold, you were trained into a form of self-protection that eventually looked like coldness to people who benefited from your warmth, because there is a persona you may have lived inside for years, and it has a familiar name: the reliable one, the responder, the one who texts back, the one who checks in, the one who makes the emotional weather tolerable for everyone else. And if you have lived that persona long enough, you learn the most brutal lesson of all. When your usefulness is the foundation of your belonging, your exhaustion becomes invisible. And here's what most people miss. The moment you went cold wasn't a mood. It was a calculation your body made for survival. Because before you stopped answering, before you stopped initiating, before you stopped showing up, you were doing something far more exhausting than caring. You were compensating, you were stabilizing, you were patching holes that were never yours to repair. And eventually, quietly, almost without your permission, your psyche began to withdraw its energy the way a body withdraws its hand from heat. Most people imagine your isolation began as a decision. But the truth is uglier and more ordinary. It began as a moment you needed someone, and the world gave you silence. Maybe it was a 2 a.m. text you sent when you were falling apart. The message wasn't poetic, it wasn't dramatic, it was simple, the kind of message you only send when pride is gone and survival is speaking. And you watched it get read and not answered. Or it was a phone call where the person said, "Can I call you back?" And they never did. Or it was the day your mind broke open and you finally admitted you couldn't hold it together alone, and the response you received sounded like you were a stranger. "I'm sorry you're going through that." What changed? You wasn't merely the absence of help. It was the sudden revelation that you had always been alone. You just didn't know it because you were too busy being everyone else's emergency contact. This is the cruel mathematics of emotional labor. You don't notice the imbalance while you're still moving, still giving, still telling yourself that love is proven by effort. But the moment you stop, the truth surfaces like wreckage. But the real rupture wasn't that nobody showed up. The rupture was that you finally saw the architecture of the relationship. You saw that the bridge only held weight in one direction. You saw that you were not inside a relationship, you were inside a performance contract, and you were the only one performing. And once you see that, something in you stops negotiating, not because you're bitter, but because your psyche finally refuses to fund a lie. After that rupture, your mind begins to do something that looks cynical to outsiders and feels like sanity to you. It starts keeping score, not because you enjoy it, but because your nervous system is tired of being surprised by the same ending. Every interaction becomes a cost-benefit analysis, not the cold kind, but the honest kind. How much energy does this take? What do I actually get back? What is the return on my emotional investment? And the deeper truth is this: you're not calculating to avoid love. You're calculating to find out whether love was ever truly present, or whether you were simply participating in a system that rewarded you for self-abandonment. Jung would describe this as a shift in psychic economy. Your libido, your life energy, stops pouring outward in uncontrolled streams and begins to retract, as if the psyche is saying, we need to stop hemorrhaging. Because you realize the most painful pattern wasn't being used, it was being needed in a way that never included being known. You were valued for function, not for essence. You were the emergency contact, the emotional janitor, the steady one, yet when you collapsed, the room went quiet. That's when the psyche learns a terrifying lesson. Some people don't love you, they love what you do for them. And once you see that difference, you cannot unsee it. You were pouring from an empty cup into cups that were never empty to begin with. They just wanted more. And because you were trained to believe love is proven by depletion, you kept pouring until something inside you finally rebelled. People noticed, of course. They always notice when the supply dries up. When you stop texting first, when you decline every invitation, when your availability disappears, the room feels the absence the way a body feels the loss of blood. And they will ask, with confusion sharpened into accusation, "You're so cold now, what happened to you?" As if you owe them the version of yourself that was slowly dying from giving too much. But what happened to you is simple. Your psyche did the math, and the math stopped making sense. After enough repetitions, your mind starts recognizing the ending long before it arrives. Not as paranoia, as pattern recognition. You meet someone new, you start building a connection, and somewhere in the background a quiet voice asks, "How long until this one leaves too?" It isn't cynicism, it's data. The psyche is a scientist when it has been hurt repeatedly. It gathers evidence, it forms hypotheses, it predicts outcomes, and it learns to reduce exposure. So you start controlling the one variable you can control, the exit. If everyone leaves eventually, you decide when, because abandonment hurts less when you initiate it. At least this way you saw it coming. At least this way you weren't blindsided. At least this way you could pretend you had agency. Now watch what happens when the psyche learns abandonment as a pattern, because it will try to control the ending every time. This is where people misread you. They call it self-sabotage, they call it walls, they call it fear of intimacy. But what they are really looking at is a nervous system that learned that closeness is expensive and the invoice always arrives later. And your cutting people off is rarely dramatic. There's no final confrontation where you list every betrayal and demand understanding. It's quieter than that, almost invisible. Texts go unanswered for days that turn into weeks that turn into months. Invitations are declined until your absence becomes normal. Sometimes you move to a new city and don't tell anyone until you're already gone. It's the slow fade, or sometimes it's the hard cut. Either way, you're gone. And the most unsettling part is this. The world keeps spinning, and you realize how many people never truly noticed you. until you stopped being useful. This pattern didn't begin in adulthood. Adulthood only gave it new faces. Somewhere back in childhood, you learned a lesson that was never spoken but was carved into you through repetition. Needing people is dangerous. Maybe you had a parent who was there physically but absent emotionally, a home where love arrived with conditions you could never quite meet. Maybe you were the kid who learned to handle everything alone because asking for help meant hearing "not now," or "figure it out," or worse, nothing at all. Or maybe it was subtler. You came home upset and the response was a dismissal dressed as advice. Don't be so sensitive. Other kids have it worse. You'll be fine. Your feelings became an inconvenience, your needs became a burden, and you adapted by becoming low maintenance. Your developing brain absorbed the blueprint. Connection equals eventual abandonment. Vulnerability gets weaponized. Depending on someone means giving them power to let you down. You became independent, not because you wanted to be, but because you had to be. Self-sufficient, not as a virtue, but as survival. You learned to expect nothing because expecting anything meant disappointment. You learned to make yourself small, to read rooms, to detect moods the way a radar detects storms. And this is where childhood enters the room, because the first place you learned needing is dangerous was never in adulthood. This is why adult relationships hit you so hard. They don't just disappoint you in the present, they awaken the old wound, the ancient pattern, the childhood conclusion that closeness is a trap. When people tell you, just trust more, they're asking you to override a blueprint written in survival ink. And survival ink does not erase itself just because someone says, it's different now. People will say you built walls. Sometimes that's true. But often what you built were boundaries, and they confuse the two because boundaries threaten anyone who benefited from your lack of them. Walls keep everyone out indiscriminately. Boundaries create shape. They are architecture, not hostility. They are the design of a self that has finally decided its energy matters. Jung would say you are learning differentiation, the ability to know where you end and where others begin. You are no longer a sponge, you are no longer a public utility. You are no longer an emergency resource that everyone drains. You are becoming a person with borders, and borders are not cruelty. They are reality. They allow love to be chosen instead of demanded. They reveal who can respect your humanity and who was only comfortable with your compliance. But there is a danger here, because if the world only sends you takers for long enough, the boundary begins to feel like a wall, and the wall begins to feel like a home, and the home begins to become a prison you mistake for peace. Here's the turning point. Your boundary can become a wall, and that wall can start choosing your life for you. The protective structure that saved you from bleeding can quietly become the structure that prevents you from being touched at all. You start calling isolation freedom when it's really fear disguised as control. You stop letting anyone get close enough to disappoint you, and then you interpret the emptiness as proof that closeness was never real. And this is where you have to be honest about what hurt you most. The loneliest part of your story was never solitude. The loneliest part was being unseen while surrounded. Sitting in rooms full of people and feeling invisible. Being in a relationship and still feeling fundamentally alone. Needing help and watching people look away or offer hollow platitudes that made you regret asking. Physical isolation didn't create the loneliness. It simply stopped pretending the loneliness wasn't already there. There is a particular humiliation in being unseen, not the obvious loneliness of having no one, but the deeper loneliness of having people and still being alone inside your own life. It teaches you a brutal equation. If connection makes you invisible, then solitude begins to look like dignity, because when you're alone, At least your reality doesn't have to compete with someone else's convenience. At least you don't have to shrink the truth so it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. Sometimes you scroll through old photos, birthdays, group trips, nights out that look like friendship from the outside, and you don't miss those people. You miss the version of yourself who still believed those connections were real. The you who thought that if you tried harder, cared more, gave enough, they'd finally show up for you the way you showed up for them. That version of you nearly didn't make it. You gave until there was nothing left to give. You poured yourself into people who took and called it normal, and you saved yourself by leaving. People see it as running away because people love interpretations that keep them innocent. But you know what it was. It was running toward something, toward peace, toward nervous system silence, toward mornings where you don't wake up, bracing for the next disappointment. And that is why the quiet feels sacred to you, because it doesn't demand anything, it doesn't judge you, it doesn't require performance, it simply lets you exist. Some people think you hate them. The reality is worse than that, and you know it. You're indifferent. And indifference unsettles people far more than anger ever could, because anger still implies attachment. Hate requires energy. Hate requires caring enough to hold on to the story. Indifference is what happens when the psyche has already mourned the relationship while it was still happening, and the only thing left is the empty shell. This is the shadow side of self-preservation. When you've been burned enough times, the psyche stops reaching, not because it is cruel, but because it is exhausted. Jung would say that the heart can cast a shadow too, a protective darkness that forms around what is still tender. It is not numbness, it is containment. They want closure. They want the conversation where you explain yourself, where you tell them what they did wrong, where you give them a chance to apologize or argue or fix it. But closure would require explaining yourself to people who never listened. Closure would mean reopening wounds that finally stopped bleeding, so you give them nothing, not out of punishment, but out of mercy for your own healing. Let them write whatever story they need to write about you. You're not reading it because you are no longer living inside their version of events. Here's what surprises you: the solo holidays, the birthday that passes with no texts, the emergency you handle yourself because there's no one to call. You expected it to feel devastating, like proof that you made the wrong choice. Instead, it feels quiet, and quiet becomes your favorite sound. But now we have to speak honestly, because every protection can become a prison if it is worshipped long enough. Isolation can be medicine for a season. It gives the psyche space to stop bleeding, to stop performing, to stop begging. But if isolation becomes your identity, your nervous system begins to confuse safety with avoidance. And then the wall doesn't just keep harm out, it keeps life out too. This is the danger. The part of you that learned people leave may start shaping your reality, so the prophecy always comes true. You cut people off early, you stop investing, you stop revealing anything real. And then you look around and say, see, I was right. No one stays. But you are measuring the world from behind a glass you never remove. Jung would call this a complex that has hijacked your choices, a repeating psychic program that believes it is protecting you while quietly shrinking your life. The complex doesn't lie, it simply tells an old truth in a new situation where it no longer fully applies. So the task is not to become naive again. The task is not to throw open your doors to anyone who knocks. The task is discernment, the art of being open without being porous, the craft of letting people in without handing them the keys to your nervous system. You are not meant to be a prisoner in your own fortress. You are meant to become a gatekeeper with wisdom. And this is where the Jungian path becomes real, because it asks for something harder than cutting people off. It asks for the slow, terrifying development of trust that is earned over time, tested in reality, and chosen consciously, not out of hope, but out of strength. Individuation is not isolation. Individuation is becoming an individual, someone who can stand alone without being lonely and connect without disappearing. It is the moment your life stops being organized around other people's expectations and starts being organized around your own inner law. It begins when you start hearing your own thoughts without the implanted voices of your past correcting them. When you stop confusing being needed with being loved. When you stop auditioning for acceptance and start receiving it where it naturally exists. That shift is not dramatic. It's almost invisible. It looks like choosing fewer people, not more. It looks like your no being met with respect instead of punishment. And slowly, a different kind of family begins to form. Not the family of accident, but the family of covenant. Chosen bonds. People who show up because they want to, not because tradition demands it. People who respect your boundaries without punishing you for having them. People who don't treat your vulnerability like a currency they can spend. This is the paradox. When you stop begging love from those incapable of giving it, you become available to recognize love where it actually exists. Your nervous system begins to unlearn its old training. Peace stops feeling suspicious. Calm stops feeling like the pause before betrayal. You begin to experience something unfamiliar, connection that does not require vigilance, connection that doesn't demand you keep one eye open for the moment it turns. And it may feel almost too quiet at first, because drama trained your body to interpret intensity as intimacy. But over time, the psyche recognizes the difference between adrenaline and love. Now you understand why the silence feels holy to you, not because you hate people, not because you gave up on connection, but because the quiet is the one place you can't be abandoned, the one place your worth is not negotiated by someone else's convenience. You didn't cut everyone off to punish them. You did it to keep the last flame alive, the small part of you still capable of trusting, still capable of hope, still capable of believing that love could be mutual and not merely extracted from you, because the next disappointment might have been the one that extinguished it completely. And your psyche knew that. It chose solitude the way a body chooses rest after blood loss, not because rest is the final destination, but because rest is what keeps you alive long enough to heal. So let them call you cold, let them misunderstand you, let them tell stories that keep them comfortable. Your life is not a courtroom where you must prove your innocence to people who never examined their own behavior. What matters is this. You stopped accepting crumbs and calling it a feast. You stopped shrinking so you could fit into relationships that required your self-erasure. You stopped paying emotional taxes to people who never checked the balance. You are not cold, you are clear, you are not closed off, you are protected. And if one day you choose connection again, it will not be the hollow version you were handed over and over. It will be something sturdier, built on reciprocity, truth, and earned trust. So here's my question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments, not for me, but for the part of you that needs a mirror. Are you living behind a boundary that protects your life, or behind a wall that has started choosing your life for you? And if you're somewhere in between, rebuilding slowly, learning discernment, learning what safety actually feels like, name that too. If you want more Jungian psychology that names what most people avoid, patterns others deny, realities others soften, the hidden architecture beneath behavior, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for your psyche, for the part of you that refuses to live a life built on depletion and knows there is a different way to belong without disappearing.